Hello everybody, this is GL1 and welcome to Rescue Repair STEM class number 11 for an RC car. This poor 2009 Corvette concept car, which I think should have been made. I think it's still better looking than any Corvette that's come out since 2009, although the Stingray and the new C8 with the engine in the rear are very attractive. I think this is just awesome looking. So this car here has a problem. It has two problems actually. First problem is no remote that works properly. Second problem, oh no, the batteries were left in too long and there is so much corrosion that it not only ruined the contacts for the batteries, but I opened it up, and even when I attached some voltage to the electronics, something still was off. So we are going to open this up, and I'm going to show you how I repaired it and how I take it to the next level to repair the remote and add a different kind of battery solution to the vehicle. Alright, so I'm going to show you how we take this car apart. Alright, so the first thing you have to do is you have to undo the screws that hold these bumper pieces on, and use my 40-something-year-old trusty Champion Swiss Army knife. Okay. So I'm going to remove those screws, and then the front has some screws and some plastic tabs, and I will take that out and be right back. Okay, so I got the bumper pieces off, all right, and if you don't have one of these little magnetic dishes, they're very handy to put your screws in, so you might consider something like that. All right, and now there's a couple other screws in the back I have to remove, and then one in the front, so I'm going to do that too. Pause that. Alright, so we got all the screws out, and actually there were two other screws right in there that I'd forgotten about. Alright, so the whole thing comes apart now. And here we go. And I'm going to show you what this looks like here. Alright, so there, a little screw fell out. We'll put that in our magnetic catch-all. And yeah, there's another one. So you can use electric screwdrivers and things like that on this. I usually don't. One, because when you're putting it back together, an electric screw gun can strip the screws more easily, because the metal they use on these screws is not really the best sometimes, so it does strip easily. And I really think it's also important to still use our hands and muscles to do things, so that's the other reason. All right, so here's what we got. This is kind of a neat thing. This is the antenna, all right? And this is a 49 megahertz. I think it's a 49 megahertz. Yeah, it's 49 megahertz. All right. And so the antenna actually can be shorter. A 27 megahertz, the lower the number, the longer the antenna has to be. So 49 megahertz can be a little shorter. So they have this antenna, and then they attached this wire, they soldered it to a copper plate, and then they taped the copper plate to the top of the car. So I think that's just a clever little solution for having the antenna up in the car and not sticking up. Now, if it were a wire antenna sticking up past the car, that would be, even better for the range of the vehicle, but this is going to be good enough. You're not going to go that far. All right, so what we have looking under here is we have the electronics are under here, and then we have, this is a simple steering mechanism. We have a positive and negative wire that go to a little motor, and this is not really a servo, like an independent servo. It is a servo that's molded into the plastic, but not its own structure, and it's not a real sophisticated gearing or anything. What it is it's a motor that just turns it one direction or the other. Okay, just, it's a motor, and the motor would spin around in a whole circle, but it's stopped physically by the fact that it can't go any further. So whereas a self-contained servo is much more sophisticated and electronically controlled as to how far it goes over one way or the other. This is not really controlled in the same level of sophistication. All right, and then we have the wires here that go to your motor, and you have a little bit of some cooling vents to cool it off, and then the transmission, and then this is just one axle that goes all the way through to a gear. It does not have a differential. All right, so it's more of a simple design car. There's no spring suspension on it at all. And then we have, this is where the batteries would attach to. So, all right. So I did not record this when I first started working on it because I really didn't know how it was going to go. I didn't know how everything was going to work out. And I really just should have ran a camera on it while I was working on it, but I didn't really think of it. So here's what I have. All right. So you have on the underside here, you could see where the batteries, are. All right, the batteries, you have your 4 AA batteries that went in there. And on one end is going to be a positive, and on one end is going to be a negative. Okay. So when we flip it around, we're going to see where those were. Now, this I clipped and I soldered on this wire to lengthen it. And I also found where this black wire, this is the negative, and this was the positive. And this positive wire was soldered onto this battery terminal here. This is the other side of the AA battery terminal. The batteries, they're 1.5 volts, AA batteries, and they're in a series connection. A series connection means that they're going to add up. 1.5 plus 1.5 plus 1.5 plus 1.5 is going to be 6. So this would be your terminal 6 volts positive, and then your negative terminal was underneath. Okay, if I unscrew this where the electronics are, there's a little silver tab right there, and the black wire was attached there, and that was where the beginning of the negative for those series of batteries was. And I desoldered the wire, the red wire from here, and I lifted this off and I desoldered the wire there. And so now I have the black negative and the red positive that go right to the motor, okay? And then I wanted to test it. So then I said, all right, well, let me test to make sure that the electronics are still good. Make sure that nothing went bad in the electronics from the batteries corroded. So let me show you how I tested that. All right, so what I have is a handy dandy portable battery case. This case has 4 AA batteries in it. So it's 6 volts, and it can be opened up. You can unscrew it and then pull this off, and then you can put new batteries in it when it runs out. It has its own on-off switch. And when Radio Shack was closing pretty much all their locations, I bought a whole bunch of electronic equipment, knowing that in the future I would be needing these things for all kinds of projects and, RC cars and fixing things. And it just turned out I started the show, and it's perfect because now I have all these resources to do things to fix my cars, for you all. So, all right, so here you go. You have your 6 volts right here, all right? And it has a couple of battery terminals. I'll show you that. So you have a positive and you have a negative, okay? So when this is on, 6 volts is going to come out of that, all right? And you can test that with a multi-tester. And I have a multi-tester here. So I'm going to put this on DC voltage, V with a straight line and 3 dots underneath. That is symbolizing that it's going to be DC volts. So that would be the kind of volts that come out of a battery, not alternating current. That's on the other side. All right, so it's set for 20, so that means that it'll read anything 20 volts and down. All right, and so we take our negative terminal here, I'm going to actually, I got to turn on my little battery pack. And then we take the positive. And I'm going to touch that to that. And then if we look over at the multi-tester, what do we have is we have 6.28 volts. There you go, 6.29 volts. All right, so 6.3 volts basically that are coming out of my little battery pack there. All right? All right, so we know the battery pack is working. And then we're going to take this and we're going to turn it off. We turn our battery pack off. You don't want to have it on until we're ready to do our test. So we know we have 6.3 volts that can come out of it. And what we're going to do is we're going to attach the red wire from the car to the red wire of the battery pack. And I'm going to do that with a red set of alligator clips. So I clip it on here. So you want to try to keep the colors consistent if you can, so you remember what's what. Sometimes, though, there's a blue wire and you have to designate the blue as the red or something like that. Just make sure you keep track, because if you mix it up and turn it on, you can pop a circuit. So it's important to get your positive and negative correct. All right. So, and then we're going to take the black terminal from the vehicle, attach it to our black alligator clip. All right, so that's all attached, right? All right. Now, I have a remote control, a 49 megahertz remote control. I have a lot of random remote controls that I have saved over the years just for projects like this. Like, oh, if I have an RC car and I don't have a remote, maybe I have one that will work. So I have a remote control, it has batteries in it, and I'm going to turn on my battery pack. So now it's sending voltage to the car. And then we're going to turn the car on, because it is not on. So that has an on switch underneath here. So turn that on. All right. And gently put that here. And we have our remote. And then we're going to push forward. And we get action. And then we're going to turn. And it turns. See that? All right, it turns. Now, everything is working correctly. When I hit forward with the remote, the wheels are going in a direction that would move the car forward. The steering is correct now, but it was not correct before. This remote, though it is the right frequency, the servo connections to the steering, or the motor connections, I could say, were reversed. Just because whatever the original remote was for this car, which I did not have, it would have it reversed on the remote. So how do you fix that? What you want to repair is that when you turn it one direction, it goes in the direction you intend. All right? So I had to unsolder these two terminals right here and switch them. So the yellow one was over here and the white one was over there. But I have a soldering iron, okay? And what you do is you touch that onto there, touch that onto here. That'll melt the solder, and then a nice thin wire of solder here, and then you can you pull that out. I'm not going to unsolder this and solder it again, because sometimes the more times you do that, things can go wrong. Can melt something that you didn't mean to. And I can tell you, this motor has a capacitor. You see this little orange thing right here on the motor? See that? That's to smooth out the current. If there's fluctuations in the current from just electronics, sometimes they fluctuate voltage, and that runs it just more of a smooth current. So the more you solder and unsolder that, you could possibly damage it. But anyway, what you would do, you to resolder, you would just melt the solder. You see that melting right there, and you'd put a drop of solder with a wire to reconnect that. And that's how that was done. I did the same thing here. What I did with the wires, I'm going to turn this off, is I did a process that's called tinning the wires. So what you do is when you have a wire, when you use a wire stripper, let me show you one of those. Okay, here's a wire stripper. When you strip a wire, what'll be underneath it usually is copper. Okay, so there'll be like some strands of copper. So let's strip that. So when you you see how it has all these different holes in it? Those are for different gauges of wire. And with experience, you'll start to know that a wire this thin corresponds to the second hole or maybe the third. And you should always try the larger one first so you don't accidentally dig into the copper. But all right, so just that little aside there. So all right, so underneath now you have some copper. So there's a process called tinning the wire. And what tinning the wire does, one is you see how there's all these little strands? Okay, well, you want to get those strands together so they don't become a problem. So you take the strands and you kind of twist them like that, okay? So we want those to stay together as one solid wire. That's one reason you want to tin it. The other is now that once you put a little bit of solder on it, it will be easier to solder it to the other side of the wire. So use a clamp here and hold on to that. And then I'm going to show you how to tin this wire. So I'm going to get my soldering iron. Now this soldering iron does two heats. It does 30 watt and 15 watts. So 30 watts a lot hotter. And be careful. If you're doing electronics that are delicate, you want to have it on 15. It takes a little longer to melt the solder, but it's more gentle on the electronics, especially if you're not experienced with it. Be very careful with soldering iron. I really don't want you to use these things if you haven't used them before. I don't have anybody that can show you more directly because they're very hot. They'll burn your skin in like a split second. All right, so here's my soldering iron. So I'm going to melt a little bit of solder onto the soldering iron, and then I'm going to kind of heat up the wire and hold it there, and look at that. And that puts the solder right there. It inundates the wire. And now it's nice and smooth. And it's shiny and chrome. Right? Just like in Mad Max Fury Road. And now you have a tinned wire. All right? And so if you wanted to attach another wire to that, you would tin the other wire if it wasn't already tinned. And then you can do different things. You can like hold them together. I'll show you what I mean. I'm not going to do this, but let's see. Here's I'm going to show you that like the wire from the power supply. All right. Or actually, you know what? Let me show you this. I'll show you something different. I'm going to strip this. All right, and then I'm going to tin this side. Twist that a little bit. I'm right-handed, so it's easier for me to use the soldering iron on the right side. All right, and then there we go. All right, little tinning. And then there might be enough solder on the wires already that I do not have to add solder. I don't have to hold solder to the wire. I can just take the wires, hold them close to each other, and then just kind of melt them together. And yes, and then you wait a second or two, and look at that. Now they are soldered together. All right. And so that is what I did here. And then I covered it with electrical tape. So I just tinned both sides of the wire. And look, now we have a loop. All right. And they are together. Sometimes solder over many years gets cold and it gets what's called a cold solder joint, and it loosens up and you have to resolder things. So if you ever hear the expression cold solder joint, if I ever use it, which I might, where something suddenly stopped working, it could be just a cold solder joint, and you just have to find that solder joint and resolder it, and then everything works again. All right. So now what we have is we do know that we have working positive and negative terminals for our car. I'm going to put the car back together, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to come up with a battery solution for this. Actually, before that, let me show you what I'm going to do. Something kind of clever. All right, so this is the inside of the car, right? So I want the wires on the other side. So I have some holes. I'm going to stick my lengthened wires that I soldered on through them. So now they are on the other side. And this one's a little bit more difficult. In fact, I think I can stretch it. It'll just go through that one. And let's see, is that long enough? Okay, so now when I put the car back together, I'll have the positive and negative, okay, right out here to work with, okay? So now I'm going to pause it and put it back together. All right, so now we have our car all the way back together. And what I did is while I was putting it back together, I took alligator clips and put them on the wires so that they didn't accidentally sink back into the car, which would be really annoying. All right, so here we are. We have our battery terminals for our car. And what we're going to do again before we start soldering again is we're going to make sure that nothing shifted while we're putting it back together, because I can tell you from a lot of experience that sometimes that happens and you have to, something went wrong. Maybe, you soldered something and you think it's back together, and then you put it back together and you jiggled something and you broke a connection and now it doesn't work again. So before I start soldering again, I want to make sure that everything is all right and that the car is working. So I'm going to connect back up to my battery pack. Turn the battery pack on, turn the car on. Got my remote, and good. Get that out of the way. Uh-oh, what happened? And something stopped working. See, things happen. What happened? All right, now we've got to figure out what happened there. I'm going to pause it. Okay, so really it was nothing. All it was one of the alligator clips was not completely attached. It was actually hitting this one here. And this is one of those things to check. Always check where the power is. So what happened is I put the alligator clip on a little bit too far, and it was hitting the shielding, the black shielding, and not letting the connection go through. Okay, so everything's working. And now we will start the next process. I'm going to turn everything off. And we'll start the next process of finding a battery solution. And it just so happens I have one. And I have a really good one. What I have is a 6.4 volt lithium battery that goes to a fast lane vehicle, and actually I don't even remember the original vehicle, but I know that I use it in my Lamborghini Veneno RC, because what I did to that ran on AA's, 6 volts, and I went into the car, took it apart, found the wires, and I made it so that it would work on this battery pack, which weighs, it's only the size of 2 AA's, so it's lighter, so the car is lighter, and it's a little bit more voltage than 6 AA's, which if the electronics can handle it, the car will run a little bit faster. So it's lighter and faster, and because lithium's so powerful, these 2 AA's are more powerful than 4 rechargeables, standard like nickel metal hydride, certainly nickel cadmium. So now our goal is we want this battery pack to sit in the car here, and we're going to attach this standard radio control connector to these wires. Well, it just so happens that when Radio Shack was going out of business, I bought a whole bunch of these connectors. They had bags of these connectors. So I bought these, and you can see they're pre-tinned, but it's a little short. So I'm going to extend that. It's a little stubby. I'm going to extend that, tin it again, and then we're going to attach the negative to the negative, the positive to the positive, and then we'll be able to attach this together have a battery pack connection for this car, but then we have to have a solution on holding the battery pack in, which, once again, erector set pieces to the rescue. So I'm going to do some soldering, and I'll be back after I do that. Okay, so now you can see that the wires have been tinned and they have been soldered end to end. All right, so we don't want to leave it like that. So now we're going to get some electrical tape and wrap those up. All right, so got my electrical tape. I have pre-cut some pieces, and you're going to put it on diagonally so that when you roll it, it encapsulates all the wires. You want to make sure that none of the wire is able to touch anything else and short out, okay? Because if the wire underneath here touches, this is a positive, and if it touches anything on the car that is negative, it can short it out. All right, so you want to make sure you do it. Start far enough back and, do a good job of wrapping it. And don't buy cheap electrical tape. Do yourself a favor. It's really not worth it. There are times, I suppose, that dollar store electrical tape might be good enough for something. It's not good enough for RC cars. So I don't know what it is good enough for, but spend a little bit of money and get, maybe $3-5 thing of electrical tape. It'll make your life a lot easier, because having cheap electrical tape and then it unwinds or barely sticks and then you get a short and ruin the thing. It's just not worth the frustration. All right, so now we have this hooked up, and our battery pack, okay, remember we tested it said 6.3 volts. This says 6.4. I actually tested it and it said 6.6, but when it's operating under a load, which means when it actually is functioning in a circuit, it probably does lower to about 6.4. All right, and we're going to put that on and make sure everything's working all right. The slight increase in voltage from this will be okay with these electronics, and I actually tested it already. All right, it is okay. What we're going to end up with is a car that runs a little bit faster. So, all right, so we have that connected up. Now let's turn everything on, make sure it's working all right. Turn the car on. We have our remote. And I can tell it is faster. And it's going to turn faster too. It's going to turn more responsively. I don't know if you could tell that from what we were doing earlier with the battery pack, but it's better. So, all right, so we got that going. So now we're like, well, how are we going to get this battery pack to stay in there? All right, well, this is where the erector set solution comes in. So I got to kind of have some machinations with this. All right, so I'm going to undo this here. And what I'm going to play around with is I have two pieces here of erector set. Actually, I should turn the car off. And all right, I have these two pieces here. I'm going to attach them in such a way that the battery pack can stay inside. Right, it's gonna, it's gonna move around when the car's moving, but so that it doesn't drop out. And I'm going to screw these pieces in with self-drilling screws. Now with this, I am going to have to use a drill. So I'm going to do that, and I'll be back. Okay, so now the erector set pieces are screwed in, and the battery pack is secured in there, along with the wires. So you can see there's enough ground clearance that the wires are not going to hit the ground. If you're concerned about that, as there is a little bit of some wire here, what you can do, that it does concern me a bit. You can tape it, or you can get a piece of Tupperware, which is something I might do. You get like a Tupperware lid, cut a clear piece out, and then you can screw that down into it and cover it up. Before you screw into your chassis of your RC car, you need to know to make sure that there's nothing electronic on the other side You want to make sure that you use short screws. These were very short, that they're not going to go deep into and hit something. Also, there is nothing over there on this part of the car. When the car was open, I knew that. Now, over here is your transmission on your car, so you don't want to screw into anything there because you might hit a gear, right? And sometimes you'd have to be careful screwing into anything over here because that's where all the steering mechanism is, all right? But, I probably will opt for the Tupperware solution, which I've used before. But let's make sure everything's working. I bet it is. Let's see. There we go. All right, and I'm going to take this car and run it on the floor for you. All right, and there is our 2009 concept car Corvette, which now runs on a lithium battery pack. It's a little noisy, but all right, that's the noise this car makes. All right, thanks for watching. Okay, so we're going to get this car on one straightaway. All right, so here we go. Hard to do the camera in the car by yourself. So I could see it. I'm going to get a little bit more speed here. All right, now I'm satisfied. Thanks for watching.